Hello, fellow patriots. This is Kelly Jackson with TruthWire News, Tennessee's most trusted news source for Middle Tennessee and beyond. Today, I have the distinct pleasure of welcoming my very good friend, Aundrea Gomez of Tennessee Fair Elections, who I have asked to come and give us an update on the voter integrity landscape in this current election climate. Aundrea, thank you so much for being with me today.
Thanks, Kelly. It's my pleasure.
So let's just jump right into the questions. Last year, I think, or maybe perhaps a little longer, the Heritage Foundation gave Tennessee the #1 most favorable rating with regard to voter integrity, which I think we all sort of looked at each other rather puzzled when we saw that, knowing what we know. How was that assertion incorrect? And in what specific ways did it avoid some of the serious issues that we know exist here in Tennessee?
Yeah, so we have been kind of dealing with this for the last at least a year since that first scorecard came out, and they've since updated the scorecard. What's funny about the scorecard is while Tennessee ranked #1, #2 was Georgia. So that should right there tell you a little something about that. But what Heritage did, and they're a great organization, but it was a very limited scorecard as far as what they were actually looking at.
Okay.
So they were only looking at specific laws on the books, like voter ID laws and absentee or mail-in ballot laws, whether or not states had ranked choice voting and so forth. And so Tennessee does have some good laws on the books.
Yeah.
What they didn't look at are the processes
Right.
that we follow, and is there any oversight, and are we actually following the law? And they of course didn't look at everything.
Right.
They didn't go it was very general.
Okay. So the scope was just very limited. They didn't
Very
dig
limited.
deep
Yeah.
enough. It was very
Yeah.
shallow.
Yeah,
Okay. That's
absolutely.
helpful. Yeah.
It
Because
is. And they have since recognized that it is in some ways harming
Mhm.
election integrity efforts,
Yeah.
because there's always room for improvement.
Yeah.
Why? And there's always an opportunity to have a target on your back. And we
Yeah.
know that
Yeah.
Tennessee absolutely does have a target on its
Yes.
back. There are groups that are infiltrating into the state of Tennessee
Yeah.
and that want to flip this state.
Yeah.
So Heritage does recognize that, and they don't want to get in the way of our efforts. They're
Right.
actually going to work with us on legislation
That's great.
in 2025. It's fantastic. What's interesting is that the legislators, the General Assembly here in Tennessee, has been informed that don't hide behind this. This isn't a
Right.
shield to shield you from any improvements in election
Right.
integrity. That's Heritage is letting the General Assembly know we are going to be bringing forth some legislation to
That's
actually improve
great.
it. Yes, it's fantastic. And the best analogy I can give is, people often want to look at the law and say, well, we have the law. Well, are the laws being enforced? Are they being followed? Are there
Yeah.
processes and rules in place that support the law? And who's
Right.
in charge of making sure that these laws are being followed and that
Right.
your vote is being protected? So the best analogy I can come up with is our laws are kind of like if you went out to buy some vitamins and you found the absolute best vitamin on the market,
Yeah.
and you purchased that vitamin and you brought it home and then you set it on your shelf and you never actually took the vitamin. So unfortunately,
Not
in
useful.
Tennessee, that's about how useful some of our laws are,
Yeah.
because we're losing on some of the processes.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, we are in a precarious situation in Tennessee where we are just as vulnerable as any other swing state
Wow.
because of the processes and even some of our laws. We're not in good shape. We are trailing right behind states like Arizona as
Wow.
far as the direction we are going politically.
Right. Right. So when people come here and they feel so comfortable that they came to a red state, that's absolutely meaningless with regard to some of the issues that you're addressing right now, because if we're not utilizing the laws that actually have teeth, and
Mhm.
maybe that's why they're avoiding them, is because they have teeth and they know that they could be effective, but they don't want them to necessarily be effective in the ways that obviously there are avoidance techniques that are used in order to benefit the establishment Republican supermajority. I mean, I think I'm weary from reminding people that come here, as you and I are both California natives. We're refugees here to Tennessee. So you and I both know how the story ends. We know what it looks like when you become complacent just because Republicans run your state. And so exactly what you're talking about is exactly the kind of thing we need to make sure we address, and we don't let them get away with saying, well, we're all Republicans here. We have a big tent. We're all on the
Right.
same page. When you and I both know when the doors are closed and they're having conversations with each other, that's certainly not the case.
Yeah, and the enemy definitely loves complacency.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
I mean, the enemy thrives when individuals say that everything's good here and we're winning in the state of Tennessee, and Tennessee is solid and
Oh,
solid red and solid conservative and just all those talking points.
yeah.
And we the question right now is, okay, Republican supermajority,
Mm-hmm.
if the roles were flipped,
Mm-hmm.
would you be comfortable with the other side in control with
Yeah.
the current status of our laws and processes that we have
Right.
regarding elections?
Yeah.
The answer is no.
No. But that's the hubris, that's the arrogance, or just the apathy. Oh, I won't be here and it won't affect me anyway, sort
Right.
of attitude. But
Well,
yeah,
and so for so long, our General Assembly has, they've just kind of gotten into this comfortable pattern of trusting
yeah,
state officials. They do this and not just in election integrity, they do this in a lot of different
yes,
arenas. And but with election integrity, especially, it is a very complex. It
yeah,
doesn't sound like it on the surface level, and so for most people, I think they think I go and I vote, and my
oh,
vote is counted, and it should be simple. It
should
shouldn't
be.
be complex.
No, yeah,
However, it has become incredibly complex by design,
yes,
and therefore many legislators, they really just don't know, and they don't know what they
right,
don't know. So
right,
it's just easier to outsource that instead of diving in and learning about the processes, learning the code,
right,
learning about the vulnerabilities we have in our state. They just take someone's word
yeah,
at the state level. Oh, I'm doing that. I'm checking
yeah,
on that. We're following this. And yet there's nothing really proven to show that
yeah,
there's oversight and anyone's actually looking into it. Are you actually doing this?
yeah,
So they just trust it. They put it on the orange t-shirt that was made for them.
yeah,
This is number one in election integrity, and then they move on
yeah.
about their day and focus on something else.
So in this very important presidential election year, knowing what we've just discussed now, how can we, in what ways can we push for improvement specifically where we
Mhm.
need to push for change? And what can we sort of set aside and say, okay, we've dealt with that, or that's not a priority? What specific areas do we need to continue to push for change?
So with Tennessee fair elections, my counterpart, Kathy Harms, has always said we have to do three things to
Okay.
secure elections: authenticate the voter,
Yep.
authenticate the ballot, and
Yeah.
authenticate the count.
Yes.
So everything is downstream from authenticating the voter.
Yeah.
So number one priority is our voter registration.
Yeah.
We need to be making sure that eligible people are
Hmm.
are actually the ones that are registering. Now, the threat that we have, and we have a couple of different things that we do have to follow: federal law, the National Voter Registration Act, and HAVA, Help America Vote Act. So
Okay.
we do have to follow federal law, but a lot of times election officials will conflate um, some of the laws and tell you they can't do something, but they're
Right.
really conflating and confusing the issues. Um, so when we're looking at the state of Tennessee, one of the threats that we're seeing are these NGOs, these non-government organizations that are
Yes.
coming into the state of Tennessee, and they are getting involved in voter registration.
Yeah.
They're targeting specific populations
Yeah.
such as what's going on college campuses,
Yes. It's been,
right?
yes.
Yes. And then also the voter registrations that are happening just in your communities
Yeah.
through NGOs that they go out and they target and they hold voter registration drives, and there it's not a nonpartisan type situation,
No,
right?
no.
And they're driving all of these additional voter registrations that could be suspicious. We're actually seeing a lot of, well, in different, depending on the county and what sort of university and college campuses they have, we're seeing voters that are registered at, say, the student centers on the college campus,
Okay.
or they're 70 years old and they're registered to vote at a college campus. I mean, there's some really interesting stuff going on.
Yeah. That's
But not only that, they're grooming. These NGOs, these non-government organizations, these nonprofits that are often Soros backed, right? They they are targeting especially the young, and they
yes.
gather their data and then they politically groom them.
Yeah.
So they get their cell phone information and now they're sending them text messages, political
Mhm.
text messages, and they're grooming them. So there's just a lot of nefarious activity going on.
Yeah. It brings to mind the lawsuit I reported on this last year where they were trying to, the ACLU, I think it was, filed a lawsuit to try and reinstate the voting rights of convicted felons here in Tennessee. Now, fortunately, there was a ruling at the federal level that I think put the kibosh on that, and the Attorney General did something about it in anticipation. They were trying to work something out with the ACLU, which that ruling put a stop to this back and forth bargaining they were doing with the ACLU. They were going to try and repatriate the votes of something like, it was some insane number, like 500,000, or I don't even remember the number, but it was a crazy number. In the state of Tennessee that only has 7 million people, it
Mhm.
was a big enough number, maybe 250,000, that could definitely impact the results of an election. Because I heard a study say the other day that convicted felons nearly always, they know that they vote Democrat. Convicted felons that get their votes back, or people who are convicted of crimes that have had their voting rights removed, they typically, like 95% of the time, these are people who vote Democrat. So it's the same kind of thing you're talking about, sort of. I guess if you would call the ACLU an NGO, I don't know if they would really be considered an NGO, but it's that type of moneyed influence
Mhm.
that is definitely uh, asserting itself in a way that is going to have an effect if we're not diligent about keeping track of it.
So
So,
pushing the illegals or the convicted felons to vote,
yeah,
pushing for younger and younger students to get registered. They're going into the high schools to try to register high school
yeah,
seniors well before they're 18. There's the push for, we've heard the Department of Justice is suing the state of Virginia because how dare you try to keep a non-citizen from voting?
mhm,
I mean, it's just outrageous.
yeah,
If they can't get the convicted felons to vote, well, we'll just import
yeah,
felons, just
yeah,
import
yeah,
people that are dangerous criminals, and we'll
yeah,
let them vote,
yeah.
right? So we are absolutely being replaced at the ballot
Oh,
box
yes.
with a a kind of a subject mindset rather than a citizen mindset. This isn't
Yeah.
about skin color. It's not about
No,
race.
no.
It's about replacing your vote
Yeah.
with someone who is not ideologically aligned with the
Right.
founding of this country and inalienable rights.
Yes. Yes. Agreed. So let's talk about the role that our state level officials have in this, and whether or not they have been more helpful or less helpful in these endeavors. And I'm going to name the names. I'm going to say our Secretary of State, Trey Hargett, and then his right hand, Mark Goins. How helpful or not helpful have they been in these endeavors to truly make Tennessee a safe state with regard to voter integrity?
So let's just lay a little bit of groundwork first. So when someone goes to register to vote, the National Voter Registration Act says that we have to use the federal form. And on the
Okay.
federal form, there's a question that says, are you a US citizen? And there's a box to check for yes or no.
Yeah.
It's an honor system. You do not and cannot be required to prove citizenship at registration. Now, a couple things. That doesn't mean that once that voter registration is completed, the state absolutely can verify using the SAVE database if
Yeah.
that individual is eligible to vote before putting them on the voter roll. The question is that being done? Of course,
Right.
we're always told by state officials, yes, that's always being done.
Yeah.
Okay. We can talk about that, but how can we verify that that's
Right.
actually being done, first of all?
Right.
But we can make sure, number one, that they don't get on the voter rolls. Number
Right.
two, we can talk about the notifying of the signs in the polling locations. So
Yeah.
Tennessee Fair Elections has been advocating for this for many, many, many months. I would say
Okay.
6 to 8 months.
Yeah.
We've been asking the state, can you please put out guidance? We asked county election
Yeah.
commissions to do it. They won't do it without state guidance. We've asked the state, can you please do this? Just post the law at the polling
Yes.
locations. Nope, can't do it. Nope, can't do it. Nope, can't do it. Well, last week, something changed.
Yeah.
A 10 care worker repeatedly tried to knowingly register a non-citizen to vote.
Wow.
The state was lit up over it. The story blew
Yeah.
up.
When it
And the
blew up.
very the day before early voting, guess what? They put out a
Friday.
directive that every county needed to post the law
Yep.
in the polling locations. Now, the problem being with what's being posted, it's an 8.5
Yep.
by 11.
It's very
Most
small. Yes.
Yeah, it's just a regular piece of paper. Most counties did it black and white. We did see Loudoun County did like bright volunteer orange.
Yeah.
So it does really stand out, which is cool.
Yeah.
Some counties are putting it in a prominent location. Some are kind of tucking it off in the
Yeah.
corner or
I
putting it with a bunch of others.
I think the one I saw looked like it was taped to the end of one of those tables. So it's
Right.
well below eye level.
Right. So but it's a step in the right direction. Now, the other thing that we've been advocating for is a process, right? So everyone says, well, we have voter ID laws. Okay, that's great. But what's
Right.
the process? Because, a non-citizen can get a social security number,
Yeah.
they can get a driver's license, and they can get a real ID. They
Wow.
can get all of the documents necessary. And then if they register and that registration slips through, they get on the voter rolls and they show up to vote. Well, what are they going to present for their ID? If they're a non-citizen, they've been given a temporary driver's license. It actually says temporary across the top.
Okay.
What we've been asking is, what are you doing as a poll worker?
Right.
When someone presents this, it is a clear indication that that person is
Right.
not a citizen and is not eligible to vote.
Right.
And what we were repeatedly told was, we are not trained to look at that. All they're looking at is the name and the address. In fact, did you know that they can be expired? You can vote with an expired license. It doesn't even have to be current, but they refuse to look at it. So even since this 10 care situation that just happened,
Right.
we've still been pushing. Put a process in place. Give the poll workers some verbiage. What can they say when someone presents a temporary license? They need to be able to say something. You've presented identification that indicates you may not have the eligibility to vote, whatever they come up with that's legal. And then, if necessary, provide them with a provisional ballot. That way, if they technically are a US citizen, they can come back. I think it's like within 2 days.
Okay.
And prove that it's possible someone gets a temporary license, becomes a citizen, and they didn't update their license.
Right.
Because it's expired. That's a possibility.
Right.
So then bring back your documentation that proves you have the eligibility to vote, and then we can pass your provisional ballot. None of that process has ever been put in place. And that all goes back to state officials.
Yes.
They have the authority to do this, and we don't need legislation to do any of it. Because
No.
it's in.
Right. So do you think it's fear of litigation from organizations like the ACLU, Southern Poverty Law Center, places like that, who will characterize the prohibition of just letting anybody vote as discrimination?
Well, we hear that a lot from the state, that they are always trying to avoid the lawsuits. I think that's the lazy
Me too.
response.
Me
Because
too.
it's in our law.
Yeah.
It's also in our Constitution that you have to be a citizen to vote.
Yeah.
You have the standing. Don't be lazy. Don't be
Right.
a coward.
Right.
Move forward. What's
Yeah.
sad to me is that we aren't being challenged. Someone asked me recently, are we involved in one of those? Is Tennessee being sued by the Department of Justice
Yeah.
like all of these other states? And I said, I wish we were,
Yeah.
because then it would mean we're actually following the law and doing the right thing.
Right. Right. So that kind of, leads us to what we were talking about as far as the state level officials and where the buck stops. The buck actually stops at our legislature, correct? So in what way is our legislature being so complacent as to not utilize whatever enforcement mechanisms that there is available in the law to remind the state level officials who report to them, hey, you've got these tools at your disposal, why aren't you using them?
So the state coordinator of election position actually comes before the General Assembly, and they must vote. That's going to happen in 2025.
Okay.
They can actually vote to remove that individual from that position.
Wow.
So when you're struggling at election integrity, and it apparent that state officials are kind of asleep at the wheel,
Yeah.
not following through. I mean, Kelly, we have laws on the books that go back to the 70s.
Wow.
And punch cards that have, like, why hasn't our code been updated?
Right. Well, it's not a priority. And it's not a priority because things work just fine for them the way they are.
Right.
So that's why.
Right. So what we tell people to do is, when you are having an issue, there's different levels of communication. So I think you're aware that nobody in Tennessee that is engaged in election integrity through the state is actually elected, right?
Right.
Starting with the Secretary of State, the
Right.
state coordinator of elections, your election administrator at the county level, your
Right.
election commission. Nobody's actually elected,
No,
right?
they're appointed.
So
They're appointed.
they're all appointed. And so our leverage is through our legislature.
Yeah.
So when you're communicating with your county election administrator,
Yeah.
or your county election commission, loop in your
Yes.
state legislators when there's issues and there's problems.
Yeah.
And we do encourage voters to use an app that is great for reporting any
Okay.
irregularities.
Yes.
And it's a national picture of what's going on during an election that you can actually see live. So we
Oh,
can see
wow.
if there's patterns.
Yeah, that's great.
It's called Votify Now. So
Okay.
we encourage people to get that app, put that on your phone. And if you're poll watching or you're just a voter,
Okay.
and you see anything odd happening, report it on there. You can
Okay.
put the location, and you can type in a description. Your name is not going to be put out nationally attached to it, but the information will be there for others to see.
Okay.
But then also take the issues to your county election administrator, report it to them, send an email, write up everything that you observed and witnessed.
Yeah.
And loop your state senator and your state representative into that email as well.
Yeah.
And maybe even your county commissioners. I don't know.
Yeah, that would be, sometimes that can be very effective depending on who they are. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh.
Yeah. Some I can advocate for, and so many I
Yeah.
can't. But
But we need eyes on this, right? Sunlight
yeah,
is the best disinfectant. And
yeah,
so just talking amongst ourselves about, hey, I went to vote today and my vote was switching,
yes,
or the tabulator, um, or the ballot marking
out.
device
Hmm.
printed out different names than what I selected,
Yeah,
or the tabulator was rejecting my ballot.
right.
These are all things we're hearing
Yes.
right now during this election.
Wow. So,
Or there's a paper jam.
are there specific issues of the state where you're hearing more of these things than other parts of the state?
That part I don't know. We have so Tennessee Fair Elections is a group of citizens that work on election integrity across the state. So
Right.
we do have individuals in different counties, and we are getting feedback. Of course, there's always more feedback coming out of Shelby County than any
Right.
other county. I mean, they always give us something to talk about over there.
Yes, they do.
Um, and of course, you're going to hear more from the super populated, the dense
Yes.
counties. So
Davidson.
Davidson, Shelby,
Yeah.
Williamson is usually up there with some sort of, debacle that's happening.
Yeah. Knox. Mm-hmm.
Knox County, Hamilton County would be another one.
Okay.
So yes, it's too early to really say that any one issue is like a massive issue that's scaled
Right.
across the state. Right now, it's just a matter of like collecting all of those observations and
Yeah.
experiences, and yeah.
Yeah. So kind of we sort of brushed up against it a little bit. Let's talk about the landscape nationwide because your
Mhm.
group does have connections to other voter integrity groups around the country.
Mhm.
So have you been getting any feedback, favorable reports or unfavorable about the landscape in the swing states like Pennsylvania and Georgia? I personally happen to feel like based on the polling people that I listen to, which anybody who's listening, if you're not listening to the People's Pundit, Rich Barris, find him on YouTube because, in my opinion, he's the best out there. But I think it's going to come down to Pennsylvania. If they can call Pennsylvania early on in the evening, if there's just an overwhelming number of votes for President Trump and they can call Pennsylvania, I think it's the whole ball of wax. But that's just me. I could be wrong. Are you hearing from Pennsylvania, Georgia, Arizona, Wisconsin, any of your counterparts in any of those states and how things look on the ground there?
Well, as far as the partisan part of it, no, because we don't really dive into that. Just
Okay.
really stay focused on the election process,
Right.
right? So every state is concerned about the non-citizens voting.
Right.
That's an issue that we've been talking about nationwide.
Okay.
The increase in requests for absentee ballots, and that would be like in states like Tennessee, where we don't have a mass mail-in ballot
Right. Right.
program. That's definitely an issue. Is more and more requests for absentee. Now that's something we need to tighten up the language on in Tennessee,
Right.
and because we are not a just ask for an absentee ballot
Right.
in the state.
Right.
Now, and I'm going to just rabbit trail for a quick second here. We need to make sure and tighten up the process of registering to vote and then requesting an absentee
Yes.
to make it so that the only time you can be considered as registering in person is when you go to the election commission office.
Okay.
And then you, at that time, you can request an absentee ballot and vote in absentee your first election. But
Okay.
if you register online
Right.
and you want an absentee ballot, you can't vote in person in your first election.
Wow.
Also, if you're at the county fair and League of Women Voters
Yeah.
register you
Yeah.
to vote absentee,
Yeah.
you also cannot vote absentee your first
And
election.
and they
And
don't.
they have found ways around this.
Yeah.
So, okay, where was I? Oh, the
Yeah.
landscape of the other states.
Yeah.
Other things that states are looking at are UOCAVA voters. I'm going to pull up my cheat sheet to give you
Okay.
the breakdown of that acronym. Okay, you ready? It's
Okay.
a long one.
Yes.
UOCAVA. It's uniformed
Yeah.
and Overseas Citizens Absentee Voter Act of 1986.
Okay.
Okay, so this is so our military that
Right.
are stationed out of the country, they can vote. And technically it's an absentee ballot.
Yes.
Well, in 2022, out of all of the requests for a UOCAVA absentee ballot, 63% were not military or dependents
Wow.
of military. So that
Oh,
should be a big like eye opener,
red
wake up call,
flag.
big red flag. And so Tennessee is actually, we do require, I think, a full social security number for registering,
Yeah.
but they basically, that person who is in another country
Yeah.
and they're registering to vote UOCAVA, they don't ever have to have lived in Tennessee to register in Tennessee. Isn't that
Wow.
wild?
That's insane.
It's insane. And so who's making sure that these are
Oh,
actual, again, authenticate the voter? Who is authenticating these voters? So they never have to have lived at the address that they're using to register to vote. It
that's
can be their cousin's address.
that's lunacy. That is lunacy. It reminds me of how the Democrats tried to steal the election during the Civil War. They were
Mm.
utilizing names of soldiers that were just sort of lost in the fog of the war.
Uh-huh.
Um, Not anybody you could nail down. Who knows where they were living? Who knows whether or not they were actually citizens of that particular state? It reminds me of something similar. They're utilizing the names of people that cannot be verified. It's like the number of absentee ballots being. Now I have heard there's quite a bit fewer absentee ballots being requested than in 2020. Are we seeing that as well?
It, I haven't looked at every single county and
Yeah,
looked at those numbers. We are obviously requesting such information.
yeah,
We've done some public records requests, and
yeah,
we don't necessarily get all of that information back. In fact, we've asked about the UOCAVA
yeah.
registrations. The
They're
state doesn't really respond very well to those requests. You have a little bit better luck with the county, and but therein lies part of our issue too,
right,
right? Is the county and the state not even having necessarily um, the same information that they're
right.
giving back. It just seems very disjointed.
Yeah,
The state says, oh, we're checking and doing all of this,
yeah.
and then we're sending it to the counties. And so then the county's like, well, you know, I don't have that information. I mean, there's just a lot.
It
There's a lot of loopholes.
sounds disorganized, which you would think something this important, they would want to demonstrate how organized they are, but it doesn't seem like that's much of a priority for them to do.
It's all what's happening behind the curtain and what's happening outside of public records requests.
Yeah,
So if there's no report, then there's nothing for the public to get access to.
yeah. Well, I want to kind of wrap it on hopefully a more positive note. Do you think we're in a better position this election than we were in 2020?
With the invasion at the border and the amount of people that have come into the country and into Tennessee that are non-citizens, I
Yeah.
would say no.
Okay.
With the eyes on the election and the
Yeah.
amount of scrutiny,
Yeah.
I do think we're in a better position. We have an excellent volunteer that has trained poll watchers across the country.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, across the state.
State.
Um, she'll get to the country next. Um, and so we have very good poll watcher training.
Yeah.
We unfortunately we get pushback from the counties and
Yeah.
from the county GOP saying we don't need poll watchers. We don't do that here. Now we have it in the code that poll watchers are allowed to be there and inspect and watch every aspect of the election,
Right.
and yet we get pushback. But we're kind of just barely getting back into that aspect of it and putting eyes on the
Yeah.
process. So to answer your question, we have more eyes on the process now than I
Right.
think we've ever had.
That's
We
great.
Our Tennessee Fair Elections is very education focused. So we want people to know what the code is.
Yeah.
We want people to know what the federal laws are and how
Yeah.
can we use them. We
Yeah.
want them to know how to communicate and even educate their own
Yeah.
representation. So all of those things, it takes a while. We started in the fall of 2022,
Yeah.
and here we are 2 years later, and
Wow.
we've definitely gotten stronger
Yeah.
and we're growing. We're working on voter rolls, um, and just kind of looking at, what is our state doing with voter
Yeah.
rolls? Wow, we've got people that have been deceased for 10 years that are still on our voter rolls.
Wow.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
asking
Hmm.
questions. I mean, we have no power to take anybody off of any voter rolls, but we can go through and we can analyze it and we
Right.
can bring the people that do have that authority and
Right.
say, what are you doing about this? So
Right.
we definitely we've
More
got our feet
proactive. Yeah.
we,
Yeah. Just being the awareness. Do you think it was, I personally think it was the obvious issues that we saw on election night in 2020 that sort of opened a lot of people's eyes
yeah.
to the possibilities. I mean, and everybody sort of accepts that there's a certain amount of shenanigans that happen in some cities, in some areas, every single election. I think every American, there's no American that is not so realistic that we don't know something's
Mhm.
happening somewhere.
Yes.
But to the degree and the amount that happened in 2020, I think that was just such an eye opener to see that if given enough time and given enough resources, and when I say resources, I mean millions and millions and millions of dollars. Like you said, the NGOs, there were definitely a lot of working parts, but they managed to put a plan together and they pulled it off, at least
Yeah.
that one time. I think the issue now is people having confidence in believing that they can't just do it again, because that's a lot of the comment that I see. Well, what's the point? They're just going to steal it again. And to me, that's like you said earlier, that's a lazy, black
It's
pilled.
surrender.
Yes, you cannot do that. It's your vote. Regardless of your personal feelings with regard to that, too many people died so that you would have the opportunity to go and have a voice in who it is that represents you in our government. So that, to me, that's the bottom line.
Yeah. I don't believe in surrendering and just stepping back from the process.
Yeah.
I will never surrender to communism, and
Yeah.
that's the direction
Yeah.
that we're moving in.
Yeah.
I believe that we have a duty.
Yeah.
We have our inalienable rights, and with that becomes duties. We have to
Yes.
protect and preserve
Yeah.
the country and the government that God intended us to have,
Yeah.
which starts with self-governance, which means
Absolutely.
take responsibility for your part in this entire
Yes.
ordeal. We've all got to be a part of it. Get engaged.
Get
Never
off the
surrender.
get off the couch, do something, help, get in the trenches. I think that's probably my biggest gripe
Yeah.
with the folks that come here. I love that you're here, but for the love, please, please, please don't just assume you're going to come here and everything's great and you won't have to help. Please, we
Well,
need
I
your
I
help.
I moved in 2015, and I did think that I was coming to a free and safe state, and I had a honeymoon for a couple of years, and
Yeah.
then I got a punch in the face that nope, things are not that great. And my punch came before 2020.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I agree. I know. Mine didn't. Mine came about 2000 with COVID. But then we lived in several states and I had just come here from Washington state. So, and I'm being from California, I guess I didn't have any assumptions built in, and I didn't really have any um except when it came to California and the complacency that turned it into what it is. We came here and then COVID happened. And I saw what Republicans, I was emailing my then rep over and over and over again. What's the governor doing? What's the governor doing? I'm reading the legislation. It says he can't do that. And all I got back from him was, well, it's not January. We can't do anything about it until we go into session. And even when they went into session, they didn't do anything. So that was an eye opener for me to have that understanding of Republican does not always equal conservative, and it definitely does not always. An elected official is not going to listen to you just because you vote for them, because they have ways around that. They have an agenda. So is there anything else that you would want our readers to know about the election this year, either here in Tennessee or anywhere else? Is there any advice that you can give them when they go and they vote for in the election, either early or on election day?
Always vote in person. Always, always, always vote in person. Eyes wide open.
Yeah.
If you see something that's odd or suspicious, it needs to be reported.
Yeah.
Report it to your county election administrator, include your state representation in that reporting, report it to Votify Now. Make sure you know who you're voting for.
Yeah.
Do your homework in advance. If you don't know who you're voting for, find someone trusted that is engaged.
Yeah.
And find out, what their recommendations are.
Yeah.
Always vote. Don't give up on voting. And if you're complaining that it's not worth it, then maybe you should get involved with Tennessee Fair Elections.
Yes.
And help us advocate for closing loopholes and vulnerabilities in the state of Tennessee, or we're lose the state of Tennessee and we're going to end up right behind Arizona.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Aundrea, where can everybody find you as far as your socials, website, that kind of stuff?
So Tennessee Fair Elections, we do have a website. It's tnfairelections.org. I think you can see it right there.
Yeah.
And so we have a website there. You can check us out. We do have some social media. We're on X and Facebook under the same name.
Okay.
So you can follow us, and the goal through social media is to educate,
Yes.
not inflame. We're not
Right.
trying to make anything, we're not trying to make you anxious, but we do want to educate. Do you know what the law is?
Yes.
Do you know what the Tennessee Code says? So, and we do have a weekly meeting. So if you really want to get engaged and dig in, we're open to bring on new people,
Okay.
especially in some of the counties that haven't been participating. We have about a third of the counties that are engaged. So
Yes.
that leaves 60 some counties that we could still
Wow.
use some engagement on.
Yep. Yep. And the rural counties, if you think that it can't come and infiltrate your county, those are exactly the type of counties they love to look for, is people
Yeah,
that.
anything good and
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yep.
You're
Anything good and
Mhm.
beautiful. Absolutely. Thank you so much again, Aundrea, for being with me today. This has been so fantastic. I think it's been incredibly informative. And I think, like you said, education and knowledge is definitely power. And we as Americans have the opportunity, unlike any place else in the world, at least for now, to utilize that information in a very, very powerful way to be a force multiplier for change. And I think that's what we all need to just do. I think the last handful of years have shown us complacency is a republic democracy killer. So we've got to get engaged.
Absolutely. Well said. Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you. You have a great weekend.
Thanks. You